Hello and welcome back to part 2 in this final lecture series on meetings. So what we're going to be looking at here is about confirming and concluding meetings. So we'll look at language that helps us to confirm what we've decided, what we have to do, and also how we can wrap up or conclude a meeting as well. So let's look at some language here. So confirming. So it's very important in a meeting to have a clear understanding of what's been decided or what we're going to be doing or what is the next step or what is the task that I'm responsible for or the duty that I might have after a meeting has finished. So we might use expressions like, we've decided to, and then we would summarize. So we've decided to host an event on September 15th from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. and we're going to invite 20 people and so forth, and basically you would just walk through what the decision was. Or so to sum up what we've decided is another way that we could do that. Let's confirm what we've agreed on. So we've agreed to have a training session or an education session for new employees next Monday from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m., for example. The idea here is that a lot of people think that only the chair of the meeting would do this, but that's not necessarily true. Anyone during a meeting is welcome to go back over what was decided or what was agreed on during the meeting to make sure that everyone is on the same page. Another expression, let me go over what we've agreed to do. So let me go over what we've agreed to do. So number 1, we're going to host a seminar. Number 2, it'll be on Monday. Number 3, it'll be from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Number 4, we're going to invite 20 or so guests. So again, you're just walking through the specifics of what you've talked about to make sure that they're very clear. Another one is, so to summarize our final decision. So to summarize our final decision. So again, it's very important as you're nearing the end of the meeting to use statements like this to find out what you've agreed to do, to summarize what your conclusion of the meeting was, to make sure that everyone is clear and everyone has the same understanding of what needs to happen. Now, continuing on to this, the next one is important is, what do I have to do? So from this meeting, do I have a particular task, duty, or job, or responsibility that I need to carry out? And it's really good if you can repeat this at the end of the meeting so that everyone knows what you're going to be doing. And also it's good for others to do this as well so that everyone is very clear on their particular task, their particular duty or responsibility. So for example, I'm going to prepare the invitation cards, for example. Or I'm responsible for reserving the room and setting up the room and putting materials in the room, for example. Or my main responsibility is to promote this event online, on our website, whatever it might be. So again, the idea is to just reconfirm with everyone at the meeting what your task is, what your responsibility is, what your particular job is, so that everyone knows and it's very clear. Or just simply, I will promote the event online. I'll prepare the invitation cards. I'll make sure the room is reserved and set up on the day of the seminar, conference, event, whatever it might be. But again, it's really important to make sure there are no misunderstandings about who's doing what and who has which responsibility as the meeting comes to an end. Now, once we've gone through all of this, we might want to actually conclude the meeting. And so how would we want to do that? Again, the chair is most likely to use expressions like this, but it's also okay for others in the meeting to say things like this just to kind of give this idea that I think we're done and it's time to wrap up. So, for example, anything else to add to the agenda? So is there anything else that needs to be added? Typically, this question would also be asked at the beginning of the meeting, but it could be asked again at the end, because as you've gone through all the different topics and discussions, that might lead to some new agenda topic that needs to be discussed now. So you could always ask this question, anything else to add to the agenda? Another one is, have we covered everything? Have we covered everything? Just a final check-in with everyone, make sure we didn't miss anything that was on the agenda. We didn't miss any important issues, any important details that need to be discussed. So it's again good to check in with a question like that. Or you can use this. Is there anything else to address? Is there anything else to talk about? Is there anything else to address? Is there anything else to talk about? Again, it's like the question we saw before, have we covered everything? But the idea is we might have missed something. This is common, especially in a meeting where there are multiple issues that need to be talked about, or a lot of content, or it's a long meeting, a lot of decisions have been made. It's easy to lose minor details or specific issues because you have so much that you're dealing with. So in that case, you might want to ask a question, is there anything else to address or talk about? Now, once you've asked these questions and you get a nod and an agreement from everyone that everything has been covered, there's nothing to add to the agenda, there's nothing more that we need to discuss or talk about, then you can use expressions like, that about wraps it up, right? Brings us to the end of the meeting. That looks like everything, right? That looks like everything. Or looks like we're done. Again, this is a clue to everyone that we've confirmed everything, we've checked, we've asked questions if there's anything that's been left off the agenda just to make sure that nothing is, and now we're ready to wrap up, and so we can use expressions like these. Okay, now we're going to look at a language strategy related to summarizing and confirming. So one of the things we notice about meetings is that a lot of people make the mistake of trying to summarize everything that was decided or agreed upon at the end of the meeting. Of course, that is important. You should have time at the end of the meeting to go through each item you've discussed, each agenda or each issue, to make sure that we all understand what we've agreed to, what we've decided to do. However, as we move through the meeting process, it's actually really important to use periodic summarizing and checking. So what we mean by periodic summarizing and checking is as you discuss one agenda item and you begin to wrap up that item and complete your discussions on it, before you move on to the next item, it's a really good idea to go ahead and summarize what was agreed upon, what the conclusion was, or what the consensus was regarding that agenda item before you move on to the next one. So when we mean periodic summarizing, so each item and each issue should be summarized once before we move on to the next agenda item. So let's look at some expressions that would explain how this would work. So the first one is, before we move on to the next agenda item, let's summarize what we've decided. So let's say we've talked about agenda item number 1, and now we want to summarize what was decided, what was agreed upon, what was the conclusion regarding agenda item number 1 before we move on to the second one. Once we get to the second agenda item, we do the same thing. We would summarize it at the end before we would move on to agenda item number 3. Let's look at some other examples of expressions. Let's recap what we've decided to do on this issue. So whatever issue we've talked about, let's recap. Recap simply means summarize or go over again. So let's go over again, or let's summarize what we've decided to do regarding this particular issue before we move on to the next issue. Again, what this does is it really helps to make sure that there are no misunderstandings and there's no confusion amongst the members of the meeting about what was decided and what needs to be done. If you leave everything to the end, then it can get a little confusing trying to go through all of that at one time. You will need to do that, but if you've already summarized each item individually, that final summary at the end is going to be a lot easier to do. Let's look at some other expressions. Let me check where we are at this point. So just, let me check, where are we at this point? What have we talked about? What have we discussed? What have we decided at this point before we continue any further? It's a good idea to, again, periodically, sometimes, check in, confirm and verify and summarize before moving further or before moving on to the next issue. So this is what we've agreed on so far. So far here's our agreement on this particular issue or on these two issues before we're moving on to the next ones. That's another expression you could use. Or can we reconfirm what we've decided before we go on to the next issue? So before we go on to the next issue, can we please reconfirm what we have decided? So again, this is another important way for you to periodically and sometimes check what you've talked about, what you've agreed to do, what you've decided to do before you move on to the next issue. So in this particular lesson, we talked about confirming. So you want to confirm what was decided, what was agreed upon. That's very important at the end, as you come to the end of the meeting, trying to figure out what we're going to do, what we've decided, and what we've agreed to. It's also important to recognize and also reconfirm what your responsibility is. So my responsibility is, or I will, let everyone in the meeting know what you plan to do, right? What you've been asked to do, a task, a mission, or a duty, or something that you have to complete. It's very important to let others know what you will have to do. And then we looked at concluding a meeting. Before we would conclude a meeting, we might want to check to make sure if there's any other issues that still need to be addressed. Is there anything to add to the agenda? Was anything missed or overlooked as we were going through our discussion? You'd want to check on that. And if it looks like everything has been covered, then you want to acknowledge it's time to wrap up, or it seems like we're finished, or that's all we have to do, it seems like we're done, and you can acknowledge that. We also, at the end, we talked about the importance of periodic summarizing and checking. Don't leave the summarizing all the way to the very end. As you go issue by issue, agenda item by agenda item, just take a little time at the end to summarize and confirm what you decided or what you agreed upon before you go on to the next issue. So this concludes the second lecture in this series. Thank you again, and I'll see you for the third and final lecture. Thank you.